All right. Okay, let's talk about saddle stitching. So we're gonna do, this might be two parts, I'm not quite sure yet. There's a lot to cover. We're gonna go over the tools here in a minute, but first I wanna talk about the pros and cons of saddle stitching. So the pros, if you practice a lot, you can make the stitches look better than you can on a big industrial sewing machine that I've got sitting next to me right here. It's a very, very strong stitch. You are more likely to have the leather tear than the stitches break. The way that you're creating this knot, you're essentially making a square knot in every hole. So if you do nick or abrade or cut through one of your threads, it's not going to unravel like it would out of a shirt or something. So those are some of the big benefits to it. Now some of the cons of this are it's really, really time consuming. If you get fast, a couple inches a minute is about what you can expect. Each stitch is something like probably 7 individual motions per stitch. Now personally, I like using 7 stitches per inch. I think it aesthetically looks really nice. You can go wider, you can go narrower. It's also hard on the hands. So you're having to charge a lot more for your labor because that's the majority of the time spent on that project is going to be sewing. It's hard on the hands and it just slows you down. So those are some of the negatives. Now, just real quick, let's talk about sewing machines. Benefits, obviously you're going to be screaming through something that would be very slow by hand. Some of the downsides is typically you have a lock stitch machine, so you basically are looping the top and bottom thread together, and that's where on a piece of clothing, if you have a thread fray, it'll unspool because it's not tied, it's just looped through itself. So choice is up to you. I think everybody should know how to saddle stitch. It's a good skill to have. So let's go over here and look at some of the tools we're going to need, and then we'll get into the stitching. All right, a lot of tools here. So don't get nervous because I'm covering a whole bunch of stuff. You're not going to need all of these. Let's just start going through it. What do you need? Well, you need a maul or a hammer or something to drive your tools, your pricking irons. Please, 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 please do not use a metal hammer on any of your metal tooling. You're going to mushroom the striking end up and you're not going to be able to use it, or it just thrashes your tool. So a mallet that has some forgiveness, really important. All right. You will want a hammer, something with a flat face, so you can go back through and you can tamp down your threads. That'll help level them with the surface. It'll spread the fibers. It looks really nice. So a hammer will be useful. Stitch groover is a really useful tool. If you don't have one of these, showed in other videos, wing dividers work great too. You want to give yourself a nice straight line or a groove to run your stitches in. Now, if you are doing saddlery work, very thick leather, or something on a curve that's going to be difficult with a straight tool, one of these spurs are really helpful. I'll show you how this works. Essentially what it does is, I don't have enough traction on this mat, but it'll roll and it'll give you equal spacing to put your stitches on a curve. Now something you might need is a stitch awl. Now this has a diamond pointed blade. You can see it's not spherical. These take some practice to use. If you're going through very thick leather, you need to make sure that every axis is very consistent. Now the thing with the hand stitching, the more mechanical, the better. You need to be able to repeat the exact same motions with the same tension and everything every time. Same for this tool. Essentially, you would hold this in your hand with your needles, make your punch, and then do your stitching, punch the next hole, on and on. I don't use this a whole lot because I'm not doing crazy thick leather that my sewing machine can't handle. Most of what I do now is on a sewing machine anyway. Just to point out the differences, right? So scratch awl, stitch awl, you can see that blade has a diamond point shape, and this is just a little cylinder shaped tool. Okay. Let's talk about threads. There are so many options. There are so many thicknesses of thread. When you're starting out, it's not a bad idea, my opinion, to go with a pre-waxed thread. Something like this. It's a little bit thicker. It's going to give you a much different aesthetic, but it's a little more forgiving. This is just a pre-waxed thread. And this is what I'm going to be using to show you the stitching, a little easier to see, and I'm going to give you two colors so you can see what each hand is doing. You can get thread and wax it yourself if you want to with beeswax. I don't have that kind of patience. I just get it like that. The other option, and when I do hand stitch, almost exclusively what I use is 532 linen cable. So this is a linen thread. This is what you'll find in much higher end leatherworking on, you know, custom bags, things like that. You'll see a lot of this. It's not waxed, and this does not burn well. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use a lighter, which I have a different solution than the lighter, which I'll show you here in a second. This doesn't burn very easily. In fact, I will grab that tool and show you real fast what it is. I gotta get some stuff out of the way here. This little guy has been an amazing tool for me. I do not like using a lighter to finish my stitching. It's too easy to touch the leather, mark it. It's not very precise. This little tool here is a game changer for me. It just has this little wire here, stick a AA battery in the back. It's got a little button here, and this thing will heat up and you can actually bring the thread down into the stitch hole, so it's a very clean finish. Something to keep in mind, if you're going to get one of these and you're using non-rechargeable batteries, you are going to spend a fortune going through AA's. So I would strongly recommend getting a bunch of rechargeable batteries and leaving a few on the charger so you can swap them out easily. This burns through juice really fast. So let's just talk about two options for your pricking irons. Same deal, you can go way down the rabbit hole. I don't do really much hand stitching anymore, so I never went the Cinnabrock route or anything where I'm spending a ton of money on these pricking irons. These are good. Diamond point. This is 7 stitches per inch. This is my ideal spacing. This is what I run on my sewing machine and everything. So this guy has 2, 4, 6, 8. Am I counting right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 tines on it. Anything that has a little bit more length, you'll want one of those, and then as part of your set, the matching SPI or stitches per inch, I would say get a 2. I don't really think there's a need for getting 1. You could have 1. I have a single tine pricking iron as well, but I typically just use these 2. This will let me walk around corners if I need to. Another option would be something much wider. Again, very different aesthetic. So this is 3 millimeters between each one. This is going to create a very different look. It's going to be more useful with thicker thread on thicker material. Found that the thinner the material you're working with, the smaller the project, the higher SPI and the thinner the thread. I like to use it matches the flow of that piece and it looks better. Now the last thing we're going to need is some type of stitching pony, and I'll show you that here in a minute. You can go very fancy and get something that is massive, that it has a chair included and everything, or you can get something a little cheaper that you can sit on, or something you can mount to a bench. So let's start stitching.